What's up guys? Today I'm going to talk about how to set up a Kerberos server for Linux. And I'll be using the KRB5 implementation of Kerberos from MIT on CentOS 7. And you can see here I'm installing a fresh system to work on that in my VM. So for those who don't know, Kerberos is an authentication protocol that uses symmetric encryption to securely create and exchange what are known as tickets. And these tickets are able to be used to identify and authenticate a user to a system or a service. With that in mind, users are identified by what's known as a user principal name, or UPN for short, and it takes the format of username at realm name. And of course, that realm name is all caps. So now there's really no other identity information available, so a Kerberos server other than that will not really know, for example, the home directory of a user, what kind of shell it wants, or any groups it's in, etc. So for that, you need to integrate with some kind of service such as LDAP, which the KRB5 server does support through OpenLDAP or 389 LDAP directory server, and etc. So you can integrate that LDAP server with KRB5, and essentially it'll provide that missing information that you need to have a complete solution, such as Active Directory and FreeIPA, and that's actually how these solutions work. Active Directory and FreeIPA both combine Kerberos and LDAP together to have a complete solution, along with a couple of other different things. Now, as opposed to users and the user principal names, services and systems use what is known as a service principal name, or an SPN, which typically starts with the name of the service, / and then the host name of the machine hosting the service. Now typically you can figure out what the name of the service part of the SPN should be from documentation. So like, let's say I have some kind of IMAP server, it might use imap/imap.kevco.virt or something like that, because imap.kevco.virt is the name of the server, for example. Something that we will use frequently in this series of tutorials is the host service type, and that is pretty much the service type that identifies systems. And it's also the service type that OpenSSH will be looking for, which is the most important reason for why we are using it. Now there's different components to the KRB5 server, and that's pretty much going to be the key distribution center and the KAdmin server. The key distribution center is going to handle the database and all things about the Kerberos realm, etc. in general. The KAdmin server is essentially going to allow us to remotely manage the database using the KAdmin program. And KAdmin service also holds the KPassword service, which allows users to reset their own passwords if, let's say, it's expiring due to a policy or something of the such, or perhaps they just need to reset it because of some kind of company policy. Now that's as much information as I will give you about Kerberos and all of its components and everything. But if you would like to know more, I highly recommend you check out some of the videos and documentation that I provide down in the description. They're very detailed and will explain everything about how Kerberos works, why certain things need to be a certain way. If you don't know about anything about how Kerberos works, I highly recommend you watch those videos before getting to this video. So with all that in mind, we can get started on our server. So let me log in here. And the first thing we need to do is to make sure that our hostname is set properly. And we have kerberos.kevco.virt. And if you don't know how to set your hostname, you can use hostname.ctl, set-hostname, and then whatever hostname you want to set. I'm just going to type it out just in case you don't know. Now the next thing that you need to make sure is that your time is in sync. It is very important that your time is in sync between your clients and your servers. If you watch the videos that I have posted below, you will understand why that is the case. It is very important for Kerberos to work that time is in sync between both machines. So what you can do is you can set up an NTP server, or for example, have some kind of service running that can keep time in sync. So on CentOS, that would be the cronid service. And whoops, you can see that that is actually a running service, and time should be synced using this. However, you can run your own server and have it peered and all that stuff to make sure that you have a local consistent time base. So the next step is to set up and install the server. So for me, I'm using CentOS, so I'll use yum, and I'll install krb5-server. krb5-libs, which is technically already installed, but I'll add it there anyways, and krb5-workstation, which will allow me to do some things later when I'm doing some demonstrations. And I will just say yes, install all of this. So now that we've done that, we can start editing our main krb5.conf file, which is essentially, whoops. So now that we've installed that, we can set up our krb5.conf file in /etc. So the first thing we need to do is to uncomment some of these lines. And you'll see that this is a default config that is pretty much seen in most distros. If you don't have a default config that's already set up, CentOS does a lot of handholding in most Red Hat based distros in general, so they will have this kind of sample configuration. I believe Ubuntu as well. So what you can do is you can look at the man pages and figure out some options you want to set, but this is a pretty good starting point. So you can see that the first section here, we have the logging section, and that pretty much just says where each log file will be for different things. Next is the default section, which holds most of the main configurations for your server. So you can see that there's this DNS option here first, which pretty much allows us to look up using this SRV records. I do not have SRV records because I do not have a DNS server set up for this lab. So I will leave that as false. The ticket lifetime, so how long the ticket will last, the renew lifetime, is whether the ticket's forwardable. And here we go, RDNS. We set this to false because, again, I don't have a DNS server, so RDNS, reverse DNS, will not be effective, and we don't want things to break because it's trying to do a reverse lookup when it can't do it. Here's PKNet anchors, which is where all your main certificates that may be needed for anything that you set up will be found. Next, we have the default realm option, and this is going to be our actual realm. So we will replace that with our realm, kevco.vert. Next is where the default credential cache will be saved. So it'll be saved to a file named like this. Following that is the realm section, and this is where we can declare our realms, and we will just declare the kevco.vert realm, again, all caps, as we said, even up here, default realm, all caps, kevco.vert. And in here we can say where the KDC server is, where the admin server is, and that'll be just this specific server because they're both on this server. And I'll do a find and replace, so I'll leave that there for now, I'll just uncomment it. And finally, the next section is going to be the domain realm, which essentially allows for DNS translations, so that if we have a lowercase realm name, it'll automatically translate it to the uppercase realm name it should be. And I'm just going to do find and replace using Vim, which is really just sed, and it will do the uppercase as well. Oops. There we go. All right, so now you can see we have everything, make sure everything's correct, because it is very likely that if you do something such as that search and replace with example.com, that you will perhaps have something different from Kerberos.kevco.vert or whatever domain name you have, and that can throw you off. So make sure that everything is correct before you exit out. Let's quit, write and quit. So next we have to edit our main KDC configuration, which is pretty much going to be in /var/Kerberos and KRB5 KDC. So in here we can find a few different files. We have the kdc.conf and the kadmin5.acl, and you will see a bunch of other files there soon once we're done with this entire setup. So we want to edit the kdc.conf file. And in here you'll see that the KDC default sets the default port of where the Kerberos server is going to start, which is 88 if you didn't know that. Example.com is the realm name, so we will replace that with our realm. And I will actually uncomment this AES encryption line. I want to use that. And if you wanted to, here you can see this is where the key tab is, and the ACL file for the kadmin server and whatnot. You can also disable some of the encryption types that are not used anymore. So for example, DES and DES3, ARC4 are pretty much all deprecated. But of course you might need that for some kind of compatibility reasons or whatever it is. So just figure out what you need for your environment and adjust accordingly. There's a ton of options. This is where a lot of configurations will happen at some point. But you can look into the documentation to see some of those options and what you can do with it. Now we can quit. And the next thing we need to worry about is our kadmin5.acl file, which is in this same folder, which is again is var Kerberos KRB5 KDC. So we can open that up. And here you can see that this is a service principal. Any service principal with the name admin at the realm will have access to all commands within the kadmin server. So what that means is they can add users, add principals, delete principals, accept policies, everything. So this would be pretty much complete control of the system. So in reality, you wouldn't want to have this asterisk there. There's better configurations, but for the purposes of this lab, I will leave it as an asterisk. If you want to look at how to configure it more securely, you can see how you can restrict things down to whatever least privileges you need using the documentation, again, which is provided by MIT, and it's rather good. So I will restrict this right now just to the admin service principal. and set it for the admin user. And I will replace this with my realm. Just place self just because. And now we're good. Now the next step is to create our database. So we will use the kdb5 util command with create and -s. And essentially we will set our password here for the database. And don't forget that password and you should be good. Now we should have in this folder where we are again, /var/Kerberos/kdb5kdc, we should have all of our databases. You can see why there's so many in the documentation, but all these principal files are pretty much the database. And this is what you would want to back up so in case anything goes wrong. And from here, we're pretty much done. All we have to do is set up our admin principal, which we declared in the ACL, so that we can actually connect to the kadmin server. So we will use that using the kadmin.local command. And essentially, this just means that we're locally connecting to the database. Right now, we're not running our kadmin server. We're not running our KDC. So their kadmin service itself can't connect to anything. This is how you would connect to the actual database so you can run commands and do things. And also, if you lock yourself out, this would be an easy way to go and fix things. Now, there's two ways to run this. You can open it and you'll see you get an interactive menu and you can type ? and you'll be able to get all kinds of commands you can run. Or you can quit out of that, quit. The other way you can do things is in a one-liner, and you can type kadmin.local -q and then in parentheses run whatever command you want to run or whatever it is. And that's easier for scripting. But for now, I'm just going to run it within the interactive terminal. And we will just type add print, which again, we saw if you type ? at the top one, it says add principal. There's different variations. You can do add principal with an underscore, A and K. And I'll just use add print because I prefer that way. And it also has tab complete as well. And you can do admin/admin, and you don't have to type in @kevco.vert. You can, but you don't have to. It'll automatically fill that out because it's the default realm. So you can see it's all caps and everything. And yeah, I'm setting a password here for this user, pretty much. Or what's really service principal, but it's technically a user. And I'll quit out of that. And now we should be good to start and enable our service. So I will do run systemctl, start kdb5kdc, and kadmin. And I'll enable that service so that it starts on boot and we can check that using status. Obviously, here we go. It's running, and kadmin is running as well. And now we're all good, and we should be able to continue our work from here to add a principal for this machine. So remember, as we said before, each machine can have its own principal. So we will use the kadmin service for that, and instead of using the kadmin.local service, and that also allows us to test that it's working. And what we can do is we can do -p admin/admin, and pretty much that tells us that we want to use the admin/admin service principal. And we can do -q again in here instead of going into the interactive terminal. Now we can type add principal, and we will use the -rand key flag, which pretty much just says we want to generate a random key because it's a machine, and a machine doesn't have to memorize a password. So we might as well make it something random that can't be guessed. And we would make it host, as we said before, / and then the host name, which is kerberos.kevco.vert. Now, do know that if you have Kerberos and not the rest of the domain name, and then you have that like in your host file or something on the client machine, you will need another principal as an alias to that. I'll put in my password here. As an alias to that machine. You can't have a machine called Kerberos and then have a service principal Kerberos like Kevco.vert or vice versa, as that will mess things up when certain applications try to authenticate. So for example, SSH has strict checking of host names by default, and it will definitely break if you have a mismatching host name with the service principal. So now that we've done that, our next step is simply to add it to the local key tab. And the key tab is a file where we store all of our long-term keys. So pretty much any keys that belong to the machine or that just need to be there and shouldn't be removed from the machine at any time soon. So what we will do is we can use the kt-util command for that, or I like to use the kadmin command because it's easier, and we can authenticate using our admin user, and we can use the kt-add command and then the name of our principal, so kerberos.kevco.vert. And there we go. It's now added to the /etc/krb5.keytab file. You can change that in your krb5.conf, etc. And you can see that it has a key version number of 2. That's also very handy to know because that can cause all kinds of problems later. You can also check with list prints any existing principals you have. You will see that there's also some pre-existing principals that are created for you by the Kerberos server, and you can look again into documentation to see what all of those are and what they do and how to manage them. Now the next step is pretty much to create our own user principals, create our policies, do whatever we need to do in our kadmin server, and actually I'll go back to that. Oops, mistyped my password. And we can now we can set password reset policies. We can create new principals. So for example, for our own users, so I'll make one for myself. We'll call it kdiaz, and we'll set a password. And so you can view it if you want. And now I can use that for my clients and for anything. So actually we can test that here on this machine because we have the KRB5 workstation, the entire suite. We can run kinit and then the name of our principal, so kds, type our password, and now there's no output, but if you type klist, you can view the local credentials cache, and you can see that there is a default principal kds at kevcode.vert that's authenticated, and I can use this ticket to now authenticate to other systems that might give me permission to authenticate to them. And finally, we don't want to keep this machine on our server. It's not a good idea to have random tickets on your server. So we'll use the kdestore command with the -a command, which clears out all of the cache, which is also going to be very useful with troubleshooting and debugging later on. But it'll pretty much clear out everything in the credentials cache. And you can type klist, you can see that it's completely wiped. Now the next step after this is to let other machines access your server. So the only thing left to do is pretty much to enable the firewall rules. So I will use firewall D because that's what's installed on CentOS, firewall.cmd, and I'll do -permanent --add -port. And actually I'll make this a for loop in a script because it's easier to, because it's quite a few services and it's easier to do it this way. So pull on my list because it's hard to remember all those ports. So we will say for port in, and then we'll do this. So we'll start with 88 TCP and 88 UDP. As you may have seen in the other videos, Kerberos is a UDP protocol, but sometimes it needs TCP if the tickets get very big. We have the 749/TCP. That's going to be for our kadmin server. And we have the 464/UDP port, which is going to be for our kpassword service. So if you don't want users to be able to reset their own passwords, you might just block that or something like that. And yeah, we'll done, and that should add all our ports to the firewall. And of course, we'll reload our firewall. And now from here, you're pretty much done. If you want to create DNS service records, and I'll have information about that in my blog down below, which service records you need. However, for this scenario, we don't have a DNS server set up, so I won't set it up and I won't talk about it. And plus, if you need to configure that, you probably know what you're doing. Now, as far as client machines go, we will have a video soon of how to configure SSH servers and clients, and so keep an eye out for that, and thank you for watching.